the one and only Scott Ritter, we're very fortunate, is here with us every Wednesday night. It's a kind of war log that we are doing, and no one in the whole world is better qualified to do that than him, a former US Marine intelligence officer and a former weapons inspector of note. Now, the foremost expert in the broadcast political world of war and the politics behind it, and terribly, amazingly loquacious and eloquent too. He's the wonderful Scott Ritter, and he joins us now. Scott, thanks very much for joining us again. Let's start with the rather extraordinary events on the Azerbaijan-Iran border, which are not yet properly investigated. In fact, the investigation has only just begun. But it is a bit funny, isn't it, that the president of Iran suffers a fatal helicopter crash. The prime minister of Slovakia, Fico, Slovakia, is shot and almost killed. There's an attempted coup, another one in Burkina Faso. It's almost like someone's taking out the leading opponents of the empire. Or am I being too conspiratorial here?
Well, I don't know. We live in a day and age where conspiratorial is the norm. I don't know if I would lump Iran into that into that category just yet. It's early on, as you noted in the investigation, and the Iranians themselves tend to be pointing to just the tragic, act of God, a unique weather phenomenon that appeared literally out of nowhere and brought the president's helicopter down. But an investigation will be done, and I have the utmost confidence that if there was any foul play, the Iranians would not only uncover it, but would make public note of it and hold those who perpetrated it to account. But at this moment, Iran is a nation in mourning. They've lost a very capable leader, a president and a foreign minister, whom together as a foreign policy team had put Iran on the map in a very meaningful, constructive, and positive way on the global scene. BRICS was on the horizon for Iran. It still is. They will be under new leadership, but Iran will be in BRICS because of the leadership of Ibrahim Raisi. Operation True Promise reset the deterrence posture of the Middle East in a way that takes the prerogative of violence out of the hands of Israel and the United States, because now they know that if they choose violence against Iran, violence would be dealt to them in a fashion that they can't defend against. And this is a positive, stabilizing reality. And of course, a Palestinian state. We couldn't be talking about where we are today with the promise of a Palestinian state, the hope of a Palestinian state, without the efforts of Iran. And again, Iran in the last couple of years has been led by Ibrahim Raisi, who has overseen the Iranian response to Israel's genocidal behavior in Gaza. And one of the byproducts of this are two European nations, late but still coming to the game, expressing their support for the creation of a Palestinian state. All of this is because of the leadership of Ibrahim Raisi.
He certainly has made a big impact on the world. His able foreign minister also perished in the crash, Abdullahian. It's two big shoes, two sets of big shoes that have to be filled. Any idea of the runners and riders for these positions, Scott?
I think this, first of all, we have to note that Iran is a nation that has extreme resiliency. They have institutions. They have a constitution, and the constitution is coming into play here. The first vice president of Iran has become the acting president, and he is tasked, together with the Speaker of the House and the head of the judiciary, to create a presidential commission to hold elections within 50 days. They've designated, I believe, June 29th as the day of the election. That means that 30 days prior, candidates will announce their desire to run for office. They'll be vetted by the Guardian Council and others, and they'll make their bid. These, as you said, are very, very big shoes to be filled. And I think you're going to see a situation like we saw with Lyndon Johnson after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, where he said, I am going to complete Kennedy's term, that I may be the president, but the policies are Kennedy. I think whoever is going to be president is going to complete President Raisi's term, meaning that they're going to continue the policies that have been set. And this requires a unique kind of individual, not an opportunist, but somebody who is loyal to the regime, loyal to the cause, loyal to the policies that Raisi had embraced and endorsed. And so I think it's going to be a self-selecting group of people. I don't think you're going to see, brash opportunists come in and say, now's the time for radical change. Now's the time to vote for me. You don't put 4 million people in the streets of Tehran in mourning for a president and millions of others throughout the country and think that you're going to run against that grain and succeed politically. So I think those who one would normally call the opposition will be silent in this election. And those who are deemed willing, able to continue the legacy of Raisi will put their hat in the ring. I can't give you names at this point in time. I can only describe the kind of individual that I believe will be the next president of Iran. Here's another interesting note, though. Iran, of course, has a theocratic element through the supreme leader. And whatever you think of the Ayatollah Khamenei, he's mortal. He's getting along in the years, and he has some health issues, all of which could mean that in sometime in the not so distant future, Iran will be looking for a new supreme leader. And the name that was on the top of that list was Ibrahim Raisi. And now he's gone. And so whomever is going to be president they might be looking at a man who's capable of filling two pairs of shoes, the presidency, but in the future being the supreme leader. And that, again, is a very self-selecting criterion.
Now, of course, in Iran, they have elections, albeit this filtrated election process that you have just described. But there are multiple political currents who hate each other in Iranian politics. There's a media plurality that we certainly don't have in America or Britain. There are newspapers, radios, televisions that hated Raisi, as well as those that loved him. Not a lot of people know these things, at least not in the West. But the one place that I'm going to ask you to turn to now, where there are no elections, and where anyone who began to express themselves in any kind of dissident way, is the Ukraine, where now we must refer to Zelensky as the chief martial law administrator rather than president, shouldn't we?
Well, he himself has painted himself into that corner. He acknowledges that he didn't hold elections, and he knows that by law his term ran out, I believe, yesterday, and that the only reason why he can continue to govern is that he has created martial law. So he is a dictator, literally a dictator in every way, shape, and form. He tends to believe that this is okay. He says that circumstances have come together to pursue this. But the reality is, he has suppressed opposition, as you have pointed out. It's not the war that suppressed opposition. It was Zelensky who suppressed opposition. He has denied the media the ability to have the kind of plurality that you describe in Iran. Doesn't exist in Ukraine. And it's not because of the war. No nation is under more attack than Iran. No nation is under more attack than Iran. And yet Iran has greater freedoms than Ukraine, a nation that yes, is under attack, but not internally like Iran is, not with the kind of nefarious regime change intent that Israel and the United States bring to bear. And yet Zelensky has suppressed political opposition, suppressed the media, and has elevated himself to be the unquestioned dictator of Ukraine. The problem is this runs against the grain of the narrative that the West has been putting out there of this grand Winston Churchill-like leader of democracy, the epitome of everything the West is supposed to stand for. It's been showed to be a sick joke. And it would be one thing if Zelensky was a capable leader. Okay, some people would say, you know, it's wartime. Maybe we need a strong man, an effective leader. This is the most incompetent man who has held the title president, whether it's legitimate or illegitimate, in the history of Ukraine. This is a man who is a disaster, who has led his nation to ruination. There are over 500,000 Ukrainian men buried in the soil because of this man. There are tens of millions of Ukrainian citizens who are dislocated because of this man. $1 trillion of Ukrainian treasure and economic potential has been squandered because of this man, and there's nothing to show for it but the guarantee of national ruin. He is an embarrassment as the leader of Ukraine, and such an embarrassment that I think that his time is past. I think that we're going to see sometime in the not so distant future, this dictator, this erstwhile president, will be removed from power through a combination of internal demand and external pressure.
And yet, the NATO chiefs today doubled down, didn't they? They said that at the next NATO meeting, which I believe is in Washington, D.C., on the 9th, I think, of July, I know that the new British Prime Minister, whoever that will be, will have to attend. It will be a real problem for them if it's me that has to attend, Scott. But that's wishful thinking, I'm sure. But the NATO people have doubled down. They're going to integrate Ukraine further into NATO and have declared again that they're going to bring Ukraine into formal membership of NATO. Well, that leaves Russia only with the choice of conquering the entirety of Ukraine then, doesn't it? Because that's the reason for the war in the first place.
You know, NATO talking about bringing Ukraine into the fold is a lot like sort of a sick, perverse version of the movie Weekend at Bernie's. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's two young men who are carting around a dead body trying to pretend that it is in fact alive. Ukraine is a dead body. It's dead. It will never join NATO because you need to be a living entity to be a member of NATO. This is just talk. This is fake. This is posturing done by NATO for NATO itself. This is the proverbial self-licking ice cream cone. It won't happen. No matter how much they talk about it, it physically cannot happen. As we're speaking, George, the northern front north of Kharkov is collapsing. And it's collapsing despite the fact that Ukraine has diverted all available resources, including critical reserves from the Eastern Front, to that front. And they're still collapsing. The Eastern Front now has no reserves and is under extreme pressure from the Russians, and it will begin to similarly collapse. It already has in certain areas. This is the end state of the conflict. Normally, when I speak to Russian officials, military and civilian officials, or even senior political commentators, they are loath to commit to a calendar. They just haven't done it. All calendar-related predictions about Ukraine have been done by outsiders like yours truly. And most of us have gotten it wrong because we think in terms of the imperative of timing, and the Russians think in terms of the imperative of outcome. And what we're seeing right now is the confluence of guaranteed outcome with predictable timing. And over again, I'm being told by Russians that May is the month of dramatic change on the battlefield, and we're seeing that. And that this conflict will not last the year. In fact, many of them are saying this conflict won't last the summer. So I don't know what kind of summit NATO thinks it's going to have in Washington, D.C., that it's a celebration of the future viability of life for Ukraine as a NATO member, but it will actually be a wake because Ukraine is dead. And that is the reality, the tragic reality of Ukraine. Now, how the final moments will be is in a large part up to Ukraine and NATO itself. Russia is putting pressure on Ukraine as we speak. Russia, I believe, and I get this from talking to officials, is still open to what we can call, quote unquote, a negotiated settlement. But that's a settlement that is still the dictation of terms of unconditional surrender. But Russia can be either lenient or it can be harsh. It's up to Ukraine to decide, the penalties that it will pay for continued resistance. But if they choose to go down the path of this fantasy of joining NATO, then the terms will be extremely harsh, and what we will call Ukraine won't be recognizable as a nation state.
Finally, Scott, and I'm always grateful for your time, in Gaza, there is now no possibility of cessation of hostilities, is there? There's a warrant out for the arrest on war crimes charges of the Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense. There's an extant ICJ trial for genocide of the State of Israel itself. But there's also a warrant out for the chief negotiator of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh. There's a continued savage slaughter by the side that has a navy, an air force, artillery, and a huge army. But they are still being resisted on the ground. And the world is not yet ready to agree. Egypt just said this evening they will not accept the resettlement of the population of Gaza in the Sinai Desert. So there's still no acceptance of the idea that, well, if we can't kill all the Palestinians in Gaza, perhaps we can deport them all instead in a Second World War style exodus, maybe on a ship, maybe from that pier that Joe Biden built. It's looking like war throughout the summer there, isn't it?
George, I think that we need to stop talking about a military solution to this problem. As you pointed out, the conditions aren't there for the cessation of military operations. Hamas cannot physically defeat Israel. Hamas can make Israel's life a living hell. And when partnered with Hezbollah's continued activities on the Lebanese border, the Houthis' continued interdiction of Israeli shipping, and the support of other members of Axis resistance, Israel has become a nation where the quality of life is no longer worth living. And this is how Israel will be defeated. Israel will be a nation that depopulates itself. Israel will become a nation that nobody wants to be affiliated with, both in terms of potential foreign partners and Israelis themselves. People who moved to Israel believing that they were moving into the land of milk and honey, to the easy lifestyle, pleasant beaches on Tel Aviv, now know that forever, as long as the Zionist entity exists, it will be a nation in perpetual conflict that will never know peace. Israel is the worst possible criminal in the world who has dressed himself up and gone to the party, believing that because he wears good clothes and he hangs around with powerful people, that people will affiliate with Israel. But because of Israel's reaction to the Hamas attack on October 7th, the mask is off, and the world is recognizing Israel for the horrific entity that it is, this genocidal nation, not just genocidal leadership, but a nation whose entire existence is premised on the necessity, indeed, from their perspective, it's a positive thing from their point of genocide of the Palestinian people. And one by one, the people that surrounded Israel, that Israel thought were their friends and allies, are being stripped away. And today, Israel stands virtually alone, and it will continue to stand alone until it no longer exists. And its demise will not be because Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, or others physically defeated Israel. Its demise will be because the world recognizes Israel as a state that no longer has legitimacy, a state that can no longer exist. And then the Israeli citizens themselves will seek to flee that state. This will take time, but this is the inevitable outcome of this conflict in the Middle East. Israel will cease to exist, and the Palestinian state will emerge in its stead.
Well, they'll always have Uncle Sam and John Bull, but we appear to be preparing to go into the same kind of isolation. Scott Ritter, as always, many thanks for your wisdom and your eloquence. Scott Ritter, former Marine Corps intelligence officer and former arms inspector, weapons inspector for the United Nations, not the least in the former Soviet Union and, of course, famously in Iraq.